Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us here tonight for effective poster presentations. I'm going to ask us to do one thing before we get started. Usually I take a group photo at the end, but by that time I've put everybody to sleep or they've run off for something else. Could I just ask you to turn on your cameras really quickly? We'll do a group photo and then I'm going to get straight into the content that we've got. So if I can just ask for like a minute before we get started. And I'll put this through the chat group as well for those of you who are part of our WhatsApp chat group. And I'll send that through to everybody. So just hoping a few more people will sort of turn on their cameras, let us into your office. Imad, you've got a nice background there, working in nature, very cool. Kind of jealous by that one. So I'm just going to, 10 more seconds, and then I'm just going to quickly do a screenshot. Are we ready? 3, 2, 1, smile. Fantastic. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Gonna pop that in the group chat right now. And if you don't have a copy of it, I'll make sure you can find a copy of it by the end of the session today anyway. So welcome to tonight. Let me share my screen with the slides. Tonight, when I do this topic, I'm going to do it a little bit differently to how I normally do it. First, I often co-present this topic with one of my friends and one of my colleagues who unfortunately isn't available. So you sort of just get my voice only on this one. The other unusual thing tonight is this is the first and only topic and only time you will ever see me not using my own slides. And I have this for a reason, because the slides that I've plagiarized, let's just be honest. The slides that I've used tonight come from 2 different sources, and I honestly felt that the slides were better than anything I could possibly put together myself. So what I tend to do is I use their slides, but put my own perspectives and my own ideas onto it. So you'll notice sort of the visuals are a little bit different to my usual style, but I hope that the discussion and what comes out of the discussion is going to be what's useful. So we're here tonight to talk about effective poster presentations. And this is really designing and delivering posters for conference experiences. Now, most of us, when we go to a conference, we think about, oh, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to present and I'm going to have the opportunity to get or receive feedback on my research, on my topic, and so forth. But poster presentations give us an opportunity to be able to do it a slightly different way. And that's really by having a static delivery, i.e. a 2-dimensional delivery, i.e. the poster, but the opportunity for others to view your poster and then come on board and ask you questions and interact with you, much like a Q&A session would be in a typical conference presentation. But you're not speaking the poster to everybody. So in that case, posters have some similarities to giving a presentation, but they also enable you to step back a little bit and people can interact with your poster without you being there. Although, of course, our goal with a conference is finding a way that we do talk with people and we do share our ideas and we do get feedback on our research with other people. As I said, I've adapted these materials and the references there for you. Let's move into the content. It takes intelligence, even brilliance, to condense and focus information into a clear, simple presentation that will be read and remembered. Ignorance and arrogance are shown in a crowded, complicated, hard to read poster. I want to really just get across the point that, look, a good quality conference poster is simple and clear. It's not overwhelming. It's not too much. It's not too much information. It's not too many graphics or complicated graphics, especially if you came to my session last week. You know, we want to keep away from complicated graphics. But it is about simplicity. It's about being able to communicate the idea very quickly and very efficiently to the audience. Now, one of the greatest skills we will develop as a PhD researcher is not the research that we do, that's easy, but the ability to communicate our research to different audiences in a very easy to understand way. And this makes us, or a poster forces and encourages us to be able to present the research we have, but to present it in such a way that people will understand it without us actually necessarily being there to defend it, although the chances are you will get to that defense. Posters are not PowerPoint slides, so it's not like I'm doing tonight, or as I do almost every Wednesday throughout the year, put up some slides and talk about it. It's not simply a series of PowerPoint slides that step you through what you're doing like you might be giving a lecture. Now, I say that because this is about the design of the communication, not the communication itself. In order to prepare for a poster, I personally will create PowerPoint slides. And in fact, in order to prepare for almost anything, including writing a chapter, writing a journal article, writing any form of communication, I often actually just write PowerPoint slides to start with, and I use that as my framework. But the poster itself is not just a series of PowerPoint slides. There's got to be more connectivity between the slides, between the different pieces of content. And also there has to be a way of communicating that is a little bit different to what PowerPoint does. PowerPoint slides, especially if you teach, if you're lecturing like I do, and I know many of you do, if you're lecturing, you'll probably use PowerPoint. They really condense little chunks of information into a single slide, and our brain is trained. Our brain is trained to sort of view them at one thing as a single unit and then move on. A poster is something that you look at holistically, and you can start anywhere as a reader, as a viewer, as the person interested in watching or interacting with the poster. You can start anywhere and then sort of move around. The way in which it's structured might follow the same format, but there is a set of differences in there as well. The second thing is, a poster is not a written report. It's not, it's not an update to the supervisor. It's not a progress note. And at the same way, it's not a conference presentation either. You're not there to present something word for word. You're there to be able to express and showcase where you're going, but you're not writing a detailed written report on it. And the value here is the language we use in posters and the language we use in written reports, i.e., how you say things, how you visually present it, be that through text or image or graphics, that will, of course, be somewhat different. So I thought we'll start off with unprofessional poster design. And I put this here because what I want to do in the second half of tonight, what I really want to do is show you, look, what are the ways we can go about designing the structure and the flow of a poster. As you probably guessed from last week when we talked about design of images, design, etc. I'm not a graphic designer, and I'm certainly far from being exceptionally skilled at it. And it's okay for all of us to be terrible at creating image design that's sort of beautiful in that. What we should be focusing on is how do we develop the structure and the content of a poster so that it communicates our research across. We don't have to worry about it being the most beautiful, but what we do have to focus on is that it tells a story, that it tells our research story, I should say, the story of our research rather than our journey, but it tells the story of our research to those who interact with it, and it becomes understandable. In what I've got on the slide at the moment, the unprofessional poster design, this really is a series of PowerPoint slides that have been printed out, glued together, and stuck on a big piece of board. It's unprofessional because this is a lecture. This is not a poster. This is not something that you can interact with in a one-way communication. It's not there because it doesn't sort of give a flow. One of the key things we have to think about when designing a poster for an academic conference is making sure that there is a particular flow so it makes sense to people. This looks like a high school kid just sort of randomly did their homework and threw it up. That's what we have to be able to make sure we constantly avoid. Effective poster design gives us a flow between the graphics, between the text, and gives us a sort of a narrative that follows through. It comes together in a short area, and the amount of space that we get for a poster is typically, I think, A1, which is A4 paper multiplied double. I've forgotten how many. But, you're probably only looking at about 1.2 meters by 70 centimeters as a typical size for your poster. And within that, you've got to be relatively eye-catching. You've got to make sure that people understand what is there. And you've got to have the key message of your narrative, which includes not only your findings, but how you achieved, how you came about getting those findings. That's got to come into it as well. It's very simple poster planning steps. We start with our title, we go into the main points, we know what format we want, we pick images, we pick a template, we select our info, we plan the flow, we limit the detail, and then we make sure it's large enough to read. Now, I've gone really quickly through that, mainly because I'm going to talk a bit more about it as we progress through the session tonight. But there's a few ones to think about. One, our title. We want to make sure that our title conveys not what we want for a journal article, but the title conveys enough information that somebody reading it at a distance says, "Ooh, I want to check out this poster," because it's got to be a call to action, or it's got to be an attraction in a way. We want to know our main points, which really is what are we going to be telling people through this particular poster? And we want to know our format. So actually, how do we want to design the flow? Now, I'm going to present shortly some opportunities for the format, i.e. the flow, the narrative, the stages. But very much so, you can look at a poster like it represents a scientific method of inquiry. So much like how we would do our dissertation, much like how we would do the typical journal article, it is going to have the introduction. It is going to have the literature review. It is going to have the methodology. It is going to have data analysis. It is going to have conclusions. What's going to be different is the amount of detail that we convey in each of those sections is going to change. Picking images simply makes sure that we're using something that is clean, clear, engaging, that represents the narrative or the key main points that we need. A poster does not have to have images. So that's the weird thing, because when we think about posters, we always think about those childhood posters of movie stars and rock stars and all of that. But at the end of the day, a poster does not have to have images there. It's better with images. Don't get me wrong, it is much better with images, but it simply does not have to have them. So we need to choose images that reinforce our main points, our main things that we need to communicate. And the picking of the template simply comes down to, in what way do I want to visually represent and allow the flow of information in my poster. Then we go to select, then we go to plan, then we limit the detail. And limiting detail is the same as editing. And the final one, the 24-point font, is about making sure that you can view this when you're standing 1 meter away from it. Unlike a journal article where I'm going to have it on my laptop or even on my phone or picking up a printed copy, it's going to be right in my face. A poster is something that 2 or 3 people may stand around. So you're going to be a little bit of a distance away. You want to make sure that people can read it. And because you're using a bigger font, because of that, you're using less words. You're being more cautious or restrictive with actually the amount of text that you put into it. Just before I move on, what you're really wanting to do with a poster, I mean, the whole goal is to share your research, to share the progress that you are making, right? But the real goal with the poster should be about inviting engagement, inviting feedback, inviting questions, inviting those who view the poster to say, let's have a chat. I want to learn more from you. So the poster is a teaser for you to then go and, in more detail, explain when you're having a one-on-one or a small group session with people. Poster negatives is really about what will make a poster not very good. So too much text or too small of a font size really detracts from the poster. And too much text means, look, you're probably answering every single question that the person may have. Therefore, they don't, or you don't, invite engagement with them. Poor organization, and that's really, it becomes difficult to see how the different sections or segments of your poster link together. It becomes too difficult to see how your narrative builds. And that means people who are looking at the poster effectively lose interest from that. If it's too crowded, i.e., too much information on one thing. In a journal article, we get maybe 6,000 to 8,000 words, which is a fantastic amount. In our PhD dissertation, we get like 100,000 words. So we can put a lot of things in there. In a poster, we don't have that luxury. We are wanting to use as less words as we possibly can just to really get the message conveyed across. Another issue with posters that are not good is poorly reproduced or enlarged images. Much like everything I spoke about last week about how we use our images and what we need to think about those uh, applies to a poster as well. We want to make sure that any photographs used are as crisp and clear as we possibly can get. If we're enlarging something, maybe we have a JPEG that we're reproducing, for example, and as we enlarge it, it becomes pixelated or it becomes distorted or any number of things. It simply conveys the idea that you did not pay attention. You did not spend enough attention to detail on putting it in there. So be very careful with the images. The interference from the color on the background, and we'll come to this as we progress through some of the further discussion tonight. We don't want a poster that's so brightly colored that it's a work of art rather than a work of academic communication. So this is where simple layouts, intelligent color choices, and having a strong narrative come to mind, because what we're doing is we're communicating academic information, not principles of design. And the final negative with some posters is no takeaway message. And the takeaway message is, look, in your research, what is the one thing, the one key idea, even if it's a question, it doesn't have to be a statement, okay? It could be a question. What is the one key idea that you want any person or every person interacting with your poster to walk away from and think, they've made a contribution? Even if your poster is incomplete research and you're talking about where you're going, what do you want people to continue to think about from the work that you've done, that they might come back to you later and say, hey, Craig, I want to explore in more detail what you did with your poster. Now, to create a poster, it's very easy. We have to think visually. So we want to avoid large blocks of continuous text. Now, here's where we differ from a conference presentation or a journal article. Because in a conference presentation or an article for publication, it's paragraphs. Paragraphs lead into sections, etc. That's large blocks of continuous text. In a poster, we encourage you to use bullet points. Clear, simple, boom, boom, boom. This is what we want. This is the key information you need from each one. You're effectively giving a structure to those who are interacting with your poster. You're not giving them everything. You're not giving them a reading assignment, but you're giving them key points that they can bring together in their own mind and work with. You want to create a logical flow of information with boxes and headings. And this is where you really get a little bit of an element of the visuality, right? But it's about utilizing your space to bring things together. Also, at the same time as you're bringing things together, you're also separating things out. You're keeping things apart from others in order to make that happen. You want to include relevant, colorful, clearly labeled, and legible images, but be careful that you don't go over the top with how they're created. And finally on this, remember that white space is good. And white space is good because at the end of the day, you're not trying to fill up everything. Having like with this slide, quite a bit of white space actually enables the person interacting with your poster to hone in on the limited words that you have. And I think that's very important. Now, posters, here's an example in terms of poster design. So poster presentation design, assuming we've got something that's basically in landscape format, we break the poster into sections. And this is one way of doing it. Okay, it's not the only way, and we'll sort of look at, a few different thoughts on how this happens. But this also gives you the very typical headings that you would expect to see within a typical poster for a conference. So a background and introduction, a set of objectives, methods, results, and you'll see here, results 1, results 2, 3, 4, conclusions, futures, and references. Now you'll notice I've missed something. I've missed from the typical dissertation model, the 5-chapter dissertation model. I've missed the literature review. And in this case, we're not really that interested in your literature review. What you might do is 1 or 2 key references that are slotted into the background, into the introduction. So in that case, unlike a journal article where we will delve into finding our research gap, exploring the trajectory, etc. In this case, we're more focused on the methods and the results than we are anything else, because that's what's going to get the discussion going. So in here, we sort of can use this. Now, not all of us are going to make use of, say, 2 boxes on methods or 4 boxes on results. So, of course, it will change. But what we're doing is we're breaking the poster up. We can actually go down from left. If we take a look at the left, we can go background, introduction, objectives, methods, and we can start reading down like it's a 3-column thing. Or we can also start reading across. So we can go background and objectives, results, and then finally conclusions. Each way still gets us through the narrative. A person like me will always want to read the methods before anything else because that's my interest. Other people may want to jump to the results directly. And the visual element, the design, showcases that the results can work. We notice down there, the bottom right, as a suggestion, okay, is the references. Now, we're not looking at, a 20-page reference list. We're not looking at 85 citations. We're looking at 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4 key references that are pertinent, that anybody interested in your research and wanting to find out a little bit of, the underpinning to it, the background, can go and refer back to. So again, this is why we're not looking at having a literature review in here. We're focused on your research primarily. But if there's a bit of context to the method, or there's a little bit of context to the history of the discipline, a singular or 2 references that may give us that information is going to be useful in there for us. Let's move on. Let's take a look. First, I could have used last week. Let's just take a look at some of the key points about the visuals first as well. So this is a bad line graph, and there's a couple of reasons why this is very bad. One, it doesn't replicate well. The font that's being used makes it difficult to reproduce, and the moment you expand it, you can already see that there are some pixelation of the writing. You'll see the line graph itself, the colors are the graph lines are actually very pixelated. If you look at the purple one, quite bad. This type of thing has not reproduced well, but it also makes it look like a high school project rather than a genuine academic effort. So it is important to think about how you present, what you present. I'd also ask you, what does this graph actually tell you? All it tells me is, except for sub-Saharan Africa, life expectancy in the world has increased over 55 years. I did not need a graph to tell me that. I needed one sentence to say, life expectancy in the past 55 years has increased globally, except sub-Saharan Africa, which experienced a decline over the past 10 years. Now, that's one sentence. So you have to think about, what do I want to represent with my visuals, with my graphics? And is there a place for it? So to me, conceptually, there is no place in my poster for this graph. Design-wise, it's a clunky graph. It doesn't really fit together very nicely. It looks untidy, and it looks like no effort has been put into making sure it's right. Now, we can also think about having a layout that really works for equal content. Now, if we go back here, you can clearly see that my focus, or the presenter's focus in this case, you'll clearly see the focus was on the results. Now, that's perfectly acceptable. You've got to decide what your focus is. Maybe the methods is a greater focus than anything else because you want feedback on it. You want to be able to see, how other people's contributions or other people's discussions with you can help you refine that. Maybe you're doing mixed methods and you're struggling with the relationship between the quantitative and the qualitative components, or you're struggling with the overall structure and plan of those. So the methods section might be better, it might be bigger. You as the researcher have to say, you know what, this is where my focal point is. In this, where we talk about having equal content, what we're trying to do is say, look, there's a few key pieces we're going to be able to try and give space to everything. So in this case, it's 6 very simple headings, and your conference poster, your first conference poster, may be as basic as this. It's not about basic or complicated. It's about, did you convey your research and your findings? And did that initiate conversations or discussions with other participants that benefited you? So if we look at this one, the equal content, introduce the reason for the investigation, so the objectives, the experimental theory. So what was the background? What framework are you using? The experimental setup, your methods. Show the results, interpret the results. What do the results mean? And finally, what the conclusions, discuss the significance. How do the results help shape other things as you progress? Now, this is as I said, this is a very simplistic graphic here, but it'll give you an idea that, look, these are the things that you need to go in there. And it is very possible that you can give them visually or in a layout perspective, that you can give them equal weighting or relatively equal weighting. We can look at the radial layout for a single main visual display. And what they've done here is, look, you've got a visual element. It might be a diagram. It may be like a process diagram. It may be a particular graph or infographic, any number of things. And the actual poster, the content of the poster, flows around that central display, that central visual element. So say, for example, you've developed a model that explains something. The model might be presented right in the middle, and that could be a simple process diagram that sort of draws your attention in, but then everything around it supports or discusses what that image is. Now, this can be really great. Maybe you haven't necessarily collected all of your data and you're doing a bit of hypothesizing and doing a little bit of predictive work. So we start with introducing, we might comment, and each of the comments is just a different factor, a different facet that we want to talk about. And what we're not doing here is necessarily giving conclusions or making an analysis, although there will be a bit of an analysis in each of the comments, right? But we're simply putting things across to invite a conversation. So if you're a very early career researcher, and maybe you are developing your research proposal, but you haven't conducted field research yet, this kind of layout helps you to be able to express the framework that you're using and what you expect you will discover or you will find from using that particular framework. So this becomes quite a valuable design or layout or approach that you can use. Again, what it means is, we can be quite early stage and talk about things from a theoretical perspective, as opposed to hard data that we have collected, or vice versa. What we have as our single visual display in the center may be a representation of specific data that we've got, and we're putting an analysis and a discussion around each of those. What we're not doing here is talking about a methodology. We're simply either focusing on a theory or we are focusing on specific elements of data that we've obtained. A different layout becomes the staggered layout for steps. And this is really just a storytelling flow, that really takes us through step by step, top left, right, left, bottom right. And it's simply giving us a visual way of putting the information. So the abstract, introducing the topic, your method, your results, your interpretation, your conclusion. So you're still coming back to that typical scientific approach, but we're presenting it visually in a way that's very easy to follow. And we're just breaking each part up. Now, this to me, if I do like this to me will be the closest to us designing a PowerPoint slide or set of PowerPoint slides for a presentation, and we're using it in that particular way. But it gives us a format that we can work with. Now, poster templates are something we should look at. To me, I will never, ever go and design a poster from the top of my head. I will go and I will look at other people's, I will see what I liked, I will see how they did it, and I will adapt other people's poster templates. So this is just an example of a typical poster template. And what you have is the left side goes down and then it goes on to the right side. So you have the background, you have the research design, you have elements going to it, and then you have conclusions that go through it as well. It's a simple design that works. Design principles, which is what we have to think about. We have to think about our proximity, the related elements, i.e., how does the narrative move? If I look at here, the narrative moves in a U shape around a central image. So typically we are trained in our mind to start reading at the top left, and we move our way across a page. And when we see a layout, it becomes quite logical. In here, because we have 3 boxes, we typically know that the first box is a complete unit. We would read that. We would move on to the second box, which is a complete unit. Then we would move on to the third box. And if we come to that, we typically see that when things are sort of staggered, like these ones, we go from abstract, we go to introduce, we go to describe, we go to show, we go to interpret. It's sort of ingrained in our mind that this is how we would effectively read a document, or we would read a graphic that we have. So our mind automatically takes us to that. So we can take advantage of that. So that's proximity. It's about showcasing the relationship. What's the journey you want between the different components of your poster? But it's also about how do you both group things together, okay, but also how do you guide your reader in terms of what do they read first, what do they read second, what do they read third? So if we're writing a journal article or even a conference presentation, we'll use words as a way of guiding people to the next things. We'll use headings, but we'll also have a top to bottom flow to it. In a poster design, you have to give some visual cues to help the person or people who are reading your poster, to help them follow and understand that. And that's where not only proximity helps, but everything you do to guide people from what part to what part. You want to think about alignment, whether we center justify, whether we, left align. Little things like that is just about making it visually appealing, but also making the story flow. Don't confuse your reader or the person, engaging with your content. Don't confuse them by using different alignments throughout the poster. Be consistent. You want to ensure there's repetition, and that means the design elements. Don't introduce different design elements for different sections, because suddenly it doesn't become a cohesive unit. Repetition creates that cohesive unit. Repetition helps us see the flow that you would want us to see. And the final thing is contrast, both colors and fonts. So the idea of having different fonts is not having a different font for each section, but making sure that headings stand out, that all texts is consistent with one, but maybe the text is in a different font to the heading and so forth. Most of us might not really want to think so much about these things, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is making sure that we keep eyes on the content, and that things like headings stand out clear enough, are distinctive enough as headings, that we know what they are. So if, for example, like me, I'm drawn to methodology sections first before anything else, I'm going to want to find that, just like that, I see where you're talking about methodology. I'll go there, I'll find an interest, and then I'll follow your narrative. The color, in terms of contrasting colors, a poster is different to anything else we do. If we prepare an article for publication, gets accepted for publication in a journal, chances are almost everything will be black and white. If we do our PhD dissertation, chances are everything, including our graphics, are going to be black and white. The only opportunities as academics we get to really embrace color in any way is our slides during a conference presentation, not the actual paper that's published or the collection of presentations that's published afterwards, but the slides. But our poster can be as well. So you want to make sure that we're using colors that work well together, that we give colors that represent, i.e. give meaning, or we give colors that oppose, so that it's very easy to distinguish different things from each other. When you're looking at colors, it's not about choosing colors that you think are pretty. It's about choosing colors that other people can view clearly, that still make sure what is presented and represented is spot on. So you have to give a lot of consideration to that element of the design. The poster font advice, 18 points or above, but 24 points for text for bigger and headings. You want to use sans serif fonts, which means Arial, Helvetica, very clean fonts to be able to have for headings, to be able to get attractive. Or for font for text, now I'm not a fan of this because I hate Times New Roman. It's probably the only font I have hated since my university days. But you want clean, common, consistent fonts for your text. The key thing is always make sure your font style, your size of the font, and the use of it is consistent, and that there is a hierarchy that you follow each time. So if I'm reading something in Times New Roman size 16, I always know that that's going to be bullet points. But Arial 24 is always going to be headings. So make sure that it follows that, because you're using the font and you're using the size. You're using the font and you're using the size to help guide your reader with the points, with your narrative. So that becomes important. We have a few ethical considerations to engage with. One is only actual authors' names belong, so don't have ghost authors. The great thing about poster presentations, especially as a PhD candidate, is your supervisor probably does not want to be mentioned. Yay. Because, you know, for a lot of us, if we write a journal article, the supervisor wants second or third authorship. They expect to be included. It's kind of the way it's done around here, university practice stuff. When we talk about poster presentations, it really, as a PhD candidate, it really is going to be you only. So it gives you that opportunity to have that little bit of the limelight. But also it's, you know, it's not about listing the 200 people that helped you, as can happen at others. And using citations is really only if you've summarized or paraphrased something extremely important there, and if you've used visuals created by others. So we're not actually looking at creating a reference list. We're not looking at having major volume of citations. It's only one or two other works that you might have interacted with. And in fact, you can create a poster presentation that does not have a single citation. You can't do that with a journal article, but you can do it with a poster. Proofreading is necessary because somebody will find the typo. That's kind of obvious. Now I want to move into the second part, and this is really going to be the components. And as you'll see, I've moved from one person's presentation to a second presentation. So bear with me, there's a tiny bit of an overlap, but let's go through this. Your main elements of a poster. So it's the title, which is the same as what you submitted for your abstract, your name and your university, core technical content, which could be the abstract. And often having an abstract is actually a really good thing. And that will be your big paragraph as opposed to your bullet points. But it is good to have an abstract there because it gives an overview of what to expect. I read the abstract and then I know what I can expect from the rest of your poster. You have introductions, results, discussion, literature cited or resources. You might have acknowledgements. I'm not a big fan of acknowledgements when it comes to posters, but if somebody did help you with creating the graphic or collection of data or something, it's ethically polite and appropriate to have an acknowledgement that says, you know, thank you to Farrell for designing the figure. Thank you to Farrell for collecting data on whatever. You want to have visual fonts that are legible, so don't use things like brush scripts. No smaller than 16. So we've got those. So let's focus on the left-hand side there. In terms of the abstract, the title of your abstract becomes very important. So it needs to reflect the content of what you're presenting. It needs to be succinct. It needs to be very specific. And you want to use keywords for indexing and for searches. And this is because your conference may actually post in a variety of formats the abstract that you use or your poster. And often they might, you know, take a very good quality photograph of the poster and make it available alongside your abstract. So make sure it's something that can be indexed and can be searched. You want to limit it to 250 words because you don't want so many things there that people are reading too much. You just sort of want it nice and quick. It includes the research question, the methods, the observation, the analysis, the findings, and the final thing is review it with your mentor. Okay, that's fair. I think having an abstract with the poster presentation keeps us in that whole conference publication mindset. You can do a poster presentation without an abstract. That's not a problem. But by having an abstract there, it keeps us in that sort of the next step is publication. And ultimately, if you're getting good feedback and you're getting ideas and questions and discussion going with others from your poster, the next step would be to formalize it as a publication opportunity. A lot of people use posters as their first step into the publishing world, i.e. journals and so forth. And it's a really great strategy. If you're not quite ready to either present at a conference or send off to a journal, a poster helps us get into that mindset. So having an abstract bridges the gap between the visual display of a poster and the academic rigor of certainly a journal article, but pretty much what a conference presentation will be as well. You want to focus on having an introduction, which might be a background. It's separate from your abstract. It has the research question, the significance of studies. It may include related current investigations. So this is the part where you kind of get the tiniest little bit of a literature review in there by mentioning one or two existing studies that relate. If you're there, they won't read it, so it's your chance to say it. So if I'm standing with you at a conference reading your poster, I've probably looked at your visuals, I've looked at your conclusion, and I'm going to ask you about it. This is your chance to say, this is what I'm doing. This is your chance to really put it in there. So if you are there, they won't read it, which means you get to say it. If you're not there, this is enough information so that they can really get interested in what you're doing. It will look at why you chose to study. So what was the rationale, the foundation for your work, the models that you might use. And you really want to go generic to specific. A few of those little things, you know, I'm not so bothered about the later pieces of advice here. But, you know, really it's giving that framework that you are using as part of what you are doing. You might then have a section on purpose and hypothesis. This can be embedded into the introduction. So it can either be part of this, or it can be a separate section as well. Again, our idea when we use boxes to visually separate out and design the flow of the narrative, this is our chance to say, you know what, I'm going to keep it separate because that's important for me. It's the purpose of the objective, the aims, the goals. Why did you experiment? The purpose. This is best for student conferences, but honestly, the more comfortable you get with conferences, you're going to find it links back into here very comfortably as well. Methods. I'm not interested in you justifying your choice of methods to me. I simply want to know what was your method so that I could replicate it afterwards. This is not a lecture on how you did your research, because, everybody else at the conference, you don't need to tell them much. They get it. What you do need to do is say, look, interviews, 65 people, translated, used in vivo, output. That's it. So it really is sort of quite simplistic, but it gives whoever interacts with your content, it gives them an understanding of what you did and how they are going to be able to replicate it if they need to. You might have a flow chart or a diagram, especially if you've created a method, or maybe you're doing mixed methods and you want to show how the interrelationship between the different strategies for your mixed methods works. It's fine. So you might have one or two citations there, references, in case you need to sort of reinforce a particular way. The results section is by far going to be your largest. So although this varies, depending on your subject, depending on your discipline, depending on your research, and whether you're, doing theoretical versus practical anyway. But, it's typically going to be the largest section. And the fact is, actually, it's what most people viewing posters at a conference are going to be interested in seeing. So it can take up some space. It summarizes the data, summarizes the results of statistical tests. You can draw implications and considerations from this. We're not about presenting raw data. In fact, we don't need to see in any format your raw data. It's not a paper. It's not a lecture that you're giving. The poster itself is what results came out of it and what does that mean. What we want to do here is make it as image-based as we possibly can. Now, that depends on, what our research is, obviously. But here is an opportunity that image means more than words if we can possibly do that. So make your figures simple, easy to see. Make sure the graphs, the lines are easy, the text is large enough. Consistency in terms of how graphs or diagrams are done, so that they don't look like they're disconnected from each other, that you can see the relationship between them. You want to minimize the use of tables. And remember last week we talked about design of tables and keeping them clean and so forth. In a poster, we want to minimize their use because they're very difficult to grasp like that. They're challenging. A graphic, a simple infographic, a process diagram, it's very easy for the average mind to look at and go, ooh, got it. When we have a table of data or stuff, it actually requires a lot more thinking. At a conference, when we're going to poster presentations, our mind isn't in, the mind isn't in the mood for complex information. So we're not going to look at something, a set of tables and say, ooh, I get it. We're going to look at it and go, too hard and move on. And because of that, you lose the interaction that's happening. So you want to keep it to graphs, you want to keep it to visuals and photographs, but you want to avoid tables wherever you possibly can. Then we look at our conclusions and our discussion. Few words, bullet points, good. Bigger font if necessary. Maybe you want to draw people towards that. The key part here is, look, the 4 questions or the 4 statements I've got with the asterisk next to them. Summarize the take-home results. What's the one thing you would want the person viewing your poster to walk away remembering about your poster? The fact, not the visual, right? What's the thing you want them to walk home with? What do you want them to know you for? I.e., what did you discover? You want to answer, how did the hypothesis work out? You want to tie it back to a real world problem if you can. What's the real implication, value of this? And really, what are we solving with our research? And why it's important. What does it mean for community, for society at large? So this has to come into it. Again, bullet points, you've only got 4 simple bullet points you need to create in this. But addressing that also helps people understand, you know what, the value of this is this. This is the thing to remember. And if they were to then go and talk about it or to write about something related, that's the thing that they come back for that potentially gets you cited in their publication. The references or literature cited, as I talked about before, is very, very simple. It's only going to be a couple. You know, you don't want a lot in there. And in many cases, you probably won't have any to include anyhow. And then we get to move into acknowledgements. And I kind of touched on that before. You know, acknowledging the faculty, the staff who supported you, thanking people. I think the most important acknowledgement here is first your supervisor. You don't want to give them authorship, but you can acknowledge their contribution. 2, if you received any research funding whatsoever, or research support in terms of maybe you were given office space to conduct this research, etc., or you got a grant to attend the conference, that's where you put that into the acknowledgements. That's appropriate. Please do not thank your mother, father, wife, husband, children, neighbor, or person who feeds your cat or dog. That's not important. Just the very, very direct ones. A few things to remember, and I'm going to wrap up in a minute anyway. So Farrell, if you're there, you're going to do a Q&A shortly. But things to remember, look, check that all expected components are present, clearly laid out, easy to follow. And often when you design it, give it to somebody who's not familiar with your work and see how they flow through the material and say, this makes sense to me. Make sure your text is concise, legible, free of spelling or typographical errors. Make sure the background is unobtrusive. You want people to read the content, not get confused or frustrated with the color or trying to sort of squint in to see things. Make sure that figures, etc., are appropriate, consistently labeled, big enough that somebody's standing, 60 centimeters away. I usually say a meter, but if we're going to look at a diagram, I might come a bit closer. But you want to make sure that somebody 60 centimeters away can clearly read your diagram, your graph, your visuals. So that's important. Photographs, tables, graphs, improve understanding, enhance. So don't put an image in there for the sake of putting an image in there. make sure it really reinforces something of value, which is usually the key takeaway, or it leads to the understanding of the key takeaway. Now you'll see there's a little reference, Pimp My Poster, which is actually where I adapted, borrowed, stole, plagiarized, whatever word you want, where I took these some of these slides from. So that's also something you can search. I'm pretty sure they're a bit more updated than Flickr nowadays.